Yeah, there's, there she is.
Hello.
Yes, we were just asking.
Harmony, it's nice to see you.
Hi.
Do you know who I am?
No, I'll be honest, I'm sorry.
Why are you sorry? How did you hear about this program?
I'm actually here for extra credit for my English, sorry, not my English class, that's my professor's last name, for my persuasion class. So I'm just trying to get extra credit.
Good stuff. I'll let him know you were here. It's my husband.
Oh, okay.
Oh my gosh.
That's why I'm like, do you know why you're here? No, I'm really glad that you're here.
Me too.
And so do all of you know what you're talking about?
That's what we were wondering. We weren't sure if we were supposed to be given a prompt or if we were just working off of what the prior discussion was.
Yeah, it's you're working off the prior discussion and talking about different points that might be interesting or challenging if you were at the front of a class, or if you were leading, if you had to do a persuasive speech. What could you look at that might challenge people, or something that might be uncomfortable? Either your knowledge, if you've read the diary, or even people who haven't read it. It's something that we know of from pop culture.
Mm-hmm.
So to think about that.
So one of the things I see that my students, we're reading the play right now, and I teach 8th grade. And one of the things that I see them be very challenged with is the relationship between Anne and her father compared to the relationship between Anne and her mother. And Anne's mother in the play is, she appears to be very overbearing, very not understanding of perhaps what her daughter or daughters are going through, but rather, Anne, stick out your tongue. Anne, have you drank your milk? Anne, take some pills. And so she just is constantly, oh, Pim, I love you the most. You're the one that I love most of all. And I see myself being terrible to my mother. And some of the students said, well, if she sees it happening, why doesn't she just stop? And that was kind of the focus of a conversation that we had today. And I said, well, as humans, sometimes we do see ourselves in the moment doing something and we can't just pump the brakes. But then you also ask,
we all good?
I didn't mean to mute people. I'm sorry. I don't know why that just happened.
No, it's all right. I muted myself because I thought if I'm sitting drinking, I might sound like a goldfish. So.
Is that me?
Oh.
Hello.
I'm actually.
Oh, hi.
How's everyone doing in here?
We're doing
Good.
Good.
Sorry, I've been quiet this whole time until right now. I was trying to find scenes. I have the graphic novel.
Oh, it's so good.
Yeah.
Oh.
As sort of like representations of the relationship between.
You guys are in good hands.
Yeah.
You guys keep chatting. We're going to take like 4 more minutes.
Yeah.
Just checking on everyone.
Yeah.
Hi. Hi.
They said that Anne and Peter spent a lot of time together there. But again, what they were talking about, of course, we have no idea.
Yeah.
Like this is how people felt during that time period. So hi, Adara.
Hello.
Hello. You're in good hands. You guys don't need me. We're going to take another 2 minutes or so.
All right, thanks.
Okay.
So we mentioned her, but we never read the story.
I don't believe it's mandatory. Like Anne Frank isn't like the mandatory rule. Like it's not like a New Jersey rule that everyone reads Anne Frank. It's just mandatory that we have some type of component of Holocaust history education or like Jewish.
Hello.
Hi, Adara.
Hello. How are you?
We're talking about the fact that Mrs. Von Don was both a snob and perhaps a more interesting character than Edith, because she is a snob, the fur coat woman who, as Vincent said, complains about the food right away. Yeah, among other things.
Oh. And yet we rarely talk about her.
She seems forgotten in the story, right? Because she is the fur coat complaining rich snob. So why do we care about people like that, right? Yeah, yeah.
And I found it a little interesting too, just about her. Of all the things that are going on, you know, the things that she complains about are just so minute and insignificant. You know, it's a wonder where people's minds are in certain situations. And you would just think everybody's concerns would be the same as yours, but but they're not always.
Yeah, it's a coping mechanism. It's easier to complain about, you know, the potatoes than the people who want to break into the secret annex and slaughter
Right.
you.
Right,
Yeah,
exactly.
Did you receive that message?
I did, yeah.
Oh, good. It's so hard to know when you're on this end. You don't see everything.
It was genuinely terrifying because you kept appearing and then disappearing. I was like, has she lost the connection?
No, I was just trying to.
Oh, she's going into the rooms. Okay, that's cool.
I remembered how to go into the room. And, you know, it's funny, the things that we know how to do, and then there's other tasks that seem like they're so basic, and yet they're overwhelming and they're nerve-wracking. It reminds me of, you know, being at a conference and worrying that the mics will stop working. Or
yeah,
this is the kind of thing, this is where my head is at. I'm gonna.
It is what it is.
You know what?
I'm a dramatist. We can improvise. It's fine. Don't
And I'm just dramatic, so we're good. We're all good. You know,
hey, there's only room for one drama queen here.
Well, imagine growing up. My sister's a theater producer. And
okay, fair enough.
So we are, you know, a house full of people, you know, growing up. Everything was a performance. None of us have talent. No talent. But we know the words to everything and we can belt it out. And yeah, my father used to march around singing cabaret and goose stepping, and I remember a boyfriend coming over once and just staring, going, "I thought you were Jewish." And I went, "Yeah." And it was so interesting, and I only think about it now, how uncomfortable that must have been for him, not knowing how to react, and he didn't realize that we were just playing, that was our way. So
I'm here, Adara. I don't have the video on. This is Maud.
Okay, perfect. Okay, we're glad that you're here.
Yeah, I've been here.
We're just waiting for everybody else to come back in. Are we all in? Okay, oh, there's Kara. Perfect. So I'm going to pull back the screen sharing.
We're just going to get a little bit of feedback from people first, see what they thought of it. So if you want to stop the screen sharing, and that make it easier for us to locate people. Sure. Do we have everybody back?
I think so. I think we lost a few people. That happens.
Oh,
that's okay.
Oh no. So what do we think of the exercise? What were some of the scenarios or the situations that people thought would be interesting to explore from the different perspectives? Go for it, shout out.
My little group and I decided that for Anne's perspective, when you would have to, you know, tell, I forget what his name was, but tell him that like you notice that he's looking at you longer than usual, that prompt, that like because of the situation and because of how you had to be quiet because you're in a contained space, kind of like maybe leaving a note in a place where only he goes, that maybe that would be pretty obvious. Because I guess if you're an outsider, I mean, if you don't know someone's nightstand, which most people don't, I don't know my dad's nightstand, I don't know my parents' nightstand, but I guess like a piece of paper wouldn't be that noticeable, or if it wouldn't be that out of an ordinary, hiding in plain sight. So kind of like leave them notes saying, you know, meet me in this area at this time, because then you can kind of be quiet and talk about it, or maybe write a note to each other.
Yep. Excellent. Yeah, fantastic. Exactly. Perfect. Well done. Any others?
In our group, we talked about, I was the only high school teacher, and the other teacher that was there teaches elementary school, and then we had a student. And one of my biggest issues is time. And would I have the time to do this? So we were trying to come up with ways that we could cover, you know, Anne Frank. And I said, you know, that in my classroom, when we finished talking about the Holocaust, I try to leave it on a positive note and celebrate the lives of, you know, people who went through the Holocaust. And, you know, like I said earlier, Anne Frank is one of the best ways to celebrate an individual. And again, that positivity that she had. And we went into talking about the pandemic, you know, how, you know, last March, April, May, our kids were freaking out because they were at home, they weren't able to go anywhere, but they had Netflix, they had Hulu, they had the internet, and, you know, just trying to make them, even for like 5-10 minutes, again, because of our time issue, to try to get them to kind of understand what life for these people was like. In, you know, again, we have our nice houses. I mean, I was teaching from downstairs last year, still am some days, and still the noise, they weren't allowed to make any of that noise. So we were trying, again, and to be quiet because I've taken too much time, again, trying to, in the short period of time that we have, trying to make them relate a little bit to that story. And the other thing that we pointed out is that, unfortunately, as time has progressed, Anne Frank's diary has become less and less popular in our middle schools, which is where it was read. Now there are all these other choices. So I get students that I say, oh, remember when you guys read Anne Frank? They're not reading Anne Frank anymore. They're reading a lot of other books. And sadly, her story is kind of being forgotten.
Yeah, yeah. And I think, again, because I think what 𝘠𝘯𝘯𝘠 was saying earlier about, you know, Anne Frank becomes like the pinnacle, and it's this, you know, this idea that the story is almost overused, and there becomes this point where people go, oh, enough already, we've heard it, we know it, why do we need to read it? You know, hopefully we'll see something of a resurgence. But again, I think it's that, you know, when you're told something or you're shown something constantly, you don't want it, you push it away, you disengage. So unfortunately, I think that might be the case of some of what has happened. But hopefully we will start the fight back. We will start the pushback to say, no, we're going to use it. And it's really interesting as well what you were saying about the pandemic, and kind of using it, because one of the things that I'm very wary of saying to somebody, if they tell me what something has happened to them, if I've been through a similar situation, I never say, oh yes, I understand. Because you can never fully understand what someone else is going through. This is my personal perspective. You can never fully understand what somebody else is going through unless you are that person. So perhaps, unsurprisingly, I will always say I can empathize. And again, it's that notion of empathy, and about that, just that getting that little bit of perspective, like you're saying, working with your students and kind of going, you have all this technology at your fingertips. They couldn't even walk around for fear that somebody downstairs would hear them. So it's really crucial what you're saying again about just giving students that little bit of insight, just that little bit of perspective, and just that glimpse into it, you know, could have been so much worse. Okay. Now I'm looking at the time. Adara, are you okay to share the screen again? Thank you. So again, with that exercise, students that I've worked with have found it really helpful in broader terms to illustrate that there isn't one singular narrative of the Holocaust, because unfortunately, through absolutely no fault of her own, Anne Frank is often seen as kind of the victim of the Holocaust, the pinnacle. And it's important that students are able to understand that people will have faced similar situations during the Holocaust, but will have experienced them very, very differently. So Mrs. Van Daan's experiences in the secret annex and how she saw situations will be very different from how Margot saw them, will be very different from how Otto saw them, will be very different from how Dussel saw them. And I think that's quite important to underscore. What I would have done, again, I'm just looking at the time, so I don't think we're going to have time to do it, but with the, I'll go through it anyway. With the pre-session readings that were sent out, one of the extracts is a theft that takes place within the annex. In the 𝘈𝘯𝘯𝘯𝘬 and 𝘋𝑑𝑒𝑚 adaptation, Van Daan sneaks downstairs in the middle of the night, steals bread. He does it a couple of times, so we see him do it, the audience see him do it, and he isn't caught. And then the next time we see him do it, Mrs. Frank catches him and is hysterical and is demanding that they leave the annex, that they be, get him out. He's taking food from the children, and Anne is crying and pleading with her mother and trying to intervene. And it builds up and it builds up, and there's this massive drama. And then Miep arrives in the midst of all this hysteria to say that the Allies have invaded, the invasion's begun, it's the start of the end of the war. With Kesselman's adaptation, similar thing, Van Daan steals food, and again, Anne is trying to intervene and sort of trying to point out that, you can't put them out on the street, and yes, he's made a mistake. With Levin, he again, and I still can't quite grasp why, especially bearing in mind that he was the one who sued Goodrich and Hackett for plagiarism, or sued Otto for plagiarism, but he also has an incident, completely fictional, completely made up, of someone stealing food, but in this instance it's Peter Van Daan, it's the son. And it's much less of a big deal, it's maybe 5 lines, and he sort of steals some food as, any of us would, your mum's cooking, she's not looking, I'll just, have a little bit out of the pot. And Mrs. Frank catches him and sort of, rebukes him, tells him off, and, makes him promise not to do it again. So what we would have done in the breakout rooms is discussed some of the questions. Why do you think the playwrights chose to include the theft of food by someone in the annex? What purpose does that serve? Why did they put that in there? Do you think that the way they've written it achieves their aims and what they set out to do? Why do you think the playwright or playwrights chose that particular character to be the thief? So in the first 2, it's Mr. Van Daan, and in Levin's adaptation, it's Peter. Should such a fictionalized event be in the adaptation? Why? Why not? And how would you explore this with your students? Because again, with the play and how pervasive it's kind of come in popular culture, is there a risk that people would, for example, see the play and go and completely believe falsely that Mr. Van Daan had essentially stolen food out of his own son's mouth? And if you look into the background behind the plays, and you can actually see that, Mr. Van Daan's brother, who survived, there was some concern that actually, because he and Otto were friends, and there was some concern, well, why has Otto let this happen? He's very strict about what he will and won't let be represented, but yet he's quite happy for a dead man's character to be essentially slandered in this way. So again, it's that notion of, and it ties back in as well with the 𝘈𝘯𝘯𝘯𝘬 interplay, which is there are moments within it that, that are referred to as, infidelity from the original text. So the expansion of Peter Schiff into a character, you know, Anne leaving the annex, going to Bergen-Belsen, going to post-war Paris. So to what extent is it okay, is it acceptable for us to fictionalize elements of a historical document? And obviously the danger with that is, depending on time, is how far around that rabbit hole you go. Because then you can start to explore things like The Tattooist of Auschwitz, 𝘂𝘩𝘓 Journey, both by Heather Morris, Low May It Be Spoken, The Boy in the Striped Pajamas, Every Holocaust Educator's Worst Nightmare. To what extent should we, can we, could we, what right do we have to fictionalize elements of the Holocaust? On the flip side, to what extent should we, if it means, for example, with novels and plays, that we can engage new generations with the Holocaust? So this is kind of some of the stuff that I'm interested in as a Holocaust theatre historian. So we're not going to do those breakout rooms, but like I said, you have the texts, and you know, so it might be something for you to think about. And then again, some possible activities and discussion points for students, for you guys to do in your classes, for teachers, for you to do with your students. Which adaptation comes closest to representing the true Anne out of the ones that you have? Where do they veer away from the true Anne? Why? You know, again, it's really important that we're having these discussions and that students are able to think things through for themselves. And there is no right or wrong answer. Have some of the class read a scene aloud while the rest listen with their eyes closed. What are some of the key words of moments that they remember? What sticks out for them? Why? You know, get them to pin that down. I found that language really evocative. You know, it could be my classmate read really, really well. It could be that I found that language to be really, really powerful. What do the students think of the endings? In spite of everything, I still believe that people are truly good at heart. What do the students think of that? You know, if you flip it and think of how Anne died, you know, 7 months later, would she really still have been saying that, having having believed, having gone through Westerbork, Auschwitz, ending up in Bergen-Belsen, having seen her sister die? Do they still think that she would have said at the end of the play, in spite of everything, I still believe that people are truly good at heart? How do you feel about the final voice in the Goodrich and Hackett and the Kesselman adaptations being Otto's? So in the Goodrich and Hackett version, he says, she puts me to shame. And in the Kesselman adaptation, he says, all that is left. So the final word is Otto's. Another exercise, improvise scenes as normal teenagers. So for example, an argument with your parents, and then have the class impose different annex conditions. So a bombing raid starts, a German patrol is nearby, the warehouse men downstairs come back from the lunch break, etc. And as a class, go through some adaptation exercises. And again, this is another interest of mine in terms of my background as a playwright. What events in the diary would the students keep or discard? So when you are adapting a text, how do you choose what you're going to include in it and what to cut out? How do you make those choices? And kind of almost as a secondary, what events have been left out by the playwrights? Do the students agree with those choices? If not, why? What could be different? And again, coming back to perspectives, would it be possible to do a one-person adaptation of the diary? And from whose perspective? One of the things I find really fascinating is the fact that Margot kept a diary, and it's been lost. No one knows what happened to it. So what would Margot be writing in her diary? What would a one-person adaptation of the Diary of Anne Frank look like from the bigger sister's view? And also questions around translation and mediation. Because if you think about it, the diary has, by the time we get, for example, to a stage play, the diary's been through 6 or 7 mediators. So you've got Anne herself when she started to rewrite the diary. You've got her dad. You've got the translator. You've got the editor. Then if it becomes a play, you've got the adapter, you've got the director, and then you've got the actor. So in a play, it's been through 7 mediators before it gets anywhere near an audience. So how do students feel about that? How do we as educators feel about that? That is essentially it from me. If you've got any questions, thoughts, suggestions, feel free to fire them at me now. I've got a couple of minutes, or my email address is there. You are very welcome to email me, and also save the date. Nazis, Monsters, Fairy Tales, Holocaust Plays for Younger Audiences. So I'm going to be doing another session on the 23rd of March, looking at how Holocaust plays can be used to engage younger audiences. So any questions, queries, thoughts before we finish?
Hi there. I'm Vince
Hi.
Custody. I'm a Kean student. I was just wondering, after reading, your paper on the whole thing between Otto and Levin, do you believe that Levin was at all justified in his fight to get, that property back? Like, after everything that happened, do you think Otto's version was more hurtful in how it played out in the end?
That is a really, really excellent question. Is it a cop-out if I say there's right and wrong on both sides? I think the way that Levin ultimately went about it was fundamentally wrong. You don't question a man in the public arena who's lost his entire family and survived Auschwitz and go, did you survive? Because how did you survive? Did you sacrifice your family? Is that how you're alive? Levin, come on, decency. But at the same time, I think, Levin, he was so desperate to tell the stories because he had seen Bergen-Belsen. I think he saw 𝘈𝘂𝘈. I think he saw Gross-Rosen. So he was traveling with the US forces as they went across Europe. I've been in the Boston University archives, and I've seen some of the telegrams that he sent back to be typed up into sort of pieces to then be published in newspapers. And some of the stuff that he says is genuinely, reading it, and it's like, oh, it really gets you. He sort of describes these people that he sees, these wraiths on the road with fever glistening eyes. These are Europe's last Jews. And he had a very complicated relationship with his own Jewish identity. His parents were immigrants, and never lost a sense of shame and inferiority at being Jewish. So he absorbed that, and it had this really knotty, profound impact on him. And then, as in the early 50s, we see McCarthyism, the communists, the Cold War, and so there's this whole notion of conspiracies, and people are whispering, and people are out to get you, and blacklisting. And Levin really felt that as well. So I don't, like I said, there's right and wrong on both sides. I think Otto should have been more open. And I think, there was definitely more conversations to be had, but at the same time, I think Levin also, there were other ways to do it. But there's a lot of sort of ink that's been spilt writing about their struggle and their conflict. So if it is of interest to you, I can point in the direction of some good books that do sort of really unpick it in a lot of detail.
And I think, Josephine, you said you had a question, because we have a couple more minutes. And then what I'm going to recommend is any of my students stay on for a few minutes afterwards. We're going to chat for a bit, but that way you can also ask Sam those questions. So we'll let the other people who have to leave ask first. So go ahead, Josephine.
Can you hear me okay? Yep. Thank you so much. I'm not an educator. I'm just a student at Kean University who read The Diary of Anne Frank when I was in middle school, reread it multiple times in high school. I was pretty obsessed with her story. And I guess just my question for you, I think a lot about the ethics of how educators use The Diary of Anne Frank. And I know that you're from the UK, but some of the instances that come to mind for me in the United States is like there's this organization called the Anne Frank Center for Mutual Respect, and I've done quite a bit of research on them, and they tend to use Anne Frank to assert their opinions on things like immigration policies, some of the controversy over Colin Kaepernick a few years ago. And I'm just curious what your thoughts are on that. Like how can we use Anne Frank in terms of politics and all sorts of global issues that are going on now without kind of treating her memory the wrong way?
And I'm going to jump in because I believe we have members from the Anne Frank Center here. So perhaps you can give the best response if you're
Oh,
comfortable.
great. Yeah. I'd love to hear it from anyone.
Yes, hi, my name is Diana and I work for the Anne Frank Center. I believe that I might have had a colleague here before, but I think that colleague left. Can you repeat your question, please, again, like in a short way?
Yeah, I'll try to summarize it. Basically what I said was, how can you use Anne Frank to address political issues going on right now without using her memory in an immoral way? Like with the Anne Frank House, I know that your primary concern is, to preserve her memory. So how do you like balance that, preserving her memory with applying it to real life situations that people can understand now?
Well, we think that Anne Frank's symbol is unfortunately, so Anne Frank's figure is unfortunately a very good symbol, not just for anti-Semitism in the past, but also anti-Semitism in the present, or discrimination, prejudice, stereotype, etc., etc. So when we, for instance, see the Capitol riots and we see that people wore 6 million wasn't enough and Auschwitz flags and T-shirts, we feel like we have to draw a similarity between the past and the present, because we teach her story and we teach history for the present so that it wouldn't be repeated again. So we know this, and we deliberately, when we see Black Lives Matter or what's going on in China with the camps to the Muslim population there in that region, we feel like we have this moral obligation to say something in our Facebook page or in any kind of platform. We do use some of Anne's quotes because some is very similar to some situation for today. Well, we hope to make a little bit of a positive difference with these posts and with these, sorry for my English, these not speeches, but these things that we say. And we are using Anne stories and Anne quotes to some of them. It seems to be working, kind of. So I think it's good that we are doing that.
Thank you so much. Thank you for being
I just wanted to step in and say one thing very quickly. I find it's very, I'm trying to think how I can phrase this. I never say that I will use Anne Frank's story or that I will use a story of the Holocaust. I always say that I will work with it, because we don't use, it just, for me, it just sounds wrong. Like, for example, I consciously never say extermination camp or extermination because that's Nazi terminology. So I will always say death camp, or, Jews were marked out for annihilation, never extermination. So for me as well, I think actually a big part of how we work with Anne's story is also even the language that we use. That's just me. So just throwing that in there.
Thank you. Yeah, that's great to think about, actually. I just, I want to summarize that just for a second. So you're saying that if we think consciously about the the very language we use, then it takes sort of a lot of the politicizing out of it by saying use versus work with, or extermination camps versus death camps. Because, right, when you think, especially in terms of how you refer to concentration camps, by referring to them exactly as what they are, death camps, then it takes away any notion or worries about politicizing the event itself. Am I understanding you correctly, more or less?
Can I speak up, please? As a Holocaust educator here in Las Vegas, that's a Nazi word, to use extermination. You exterminate rodents and vermin. By using that, it helped them take normal, everyday human people and turn them into killers. So if you hear that long enough, well, we exterminate them, they must not be human. It's part of the dehumanization. So it's not about politics. You've got to get off the idea of politics. It's a dehumanization. And Diana, Sarah Hall, where's Diana? I wanted to say, because I'm working with the Anne Frank Center a little bit with Doyle. Hi, Diana. Yeah. I think that anything that was political before, they've taken care of that there, correct? I think they've reshuffled their deck in their defense. I'm saying that, but the Anne Frank Center, but.
And yeah, following in from that as well, I think as well, it's like you were saying, you know, the Nazis used language as a weapon, and that notion of dehumanization, and you know, this notion of extermination and vermin, and so yeah, so I think definitely, yeah, that notion of, you know, if we take it back and look at it as, for want of a better way of putting it, depoliticizing and rehumanizing, then I think, you know, we're all covered. I think it goes some way, not all the way, but it helps.
And I think, you know, Josephine, I have to say, I'm so pleased that you asked a question, and you asked a question that it's difficult, and we're learning, and it takes a lot of courage to speak up when there's, you know, experts in the space, and we're always learning. And I think, you know, Harmony posted, you know, a question before, how do we think about critical citizenship? What are the benefits of learning this history and engaging with text critically? Well, by learning, you're going to become a more informed person. You're going to address, everybody has their own biases and ignorances. We have them, they're inherent to us. But when we stop, we take a minute and we think about what we're reading, what we're talking about, whose voice is it? When you hear the things in the media, you know, where is that coming from? That makes you a better person. And it makes you a better person, and it means that you will be able to then, when you hear dehumanizing language, or you hear, you know, a slur that before you may not have connected, you may not have even known something was a derogatory term. Once you know, you become that change maker. And this is how we see, you know, ripples of change. So you don't need to be the historian who's publishing the articles on it. You need to be the person that is aware and is confident in their knowledge. And I think it's wonderful. I think, you know, I'm proud of my students who are here, and I'm proud of the students that aren't my students, but have taken the time to learn. And it's a long day for everyone. And we value your time. And I would say, you know, on that note, we do understand, of course, I had some private messages sent to me that people have families and they have dinner. So we understand anyone that has to pop off. The fact that you made it on this long is incredible. I'm going to ask Sam if you have a few minutes to stick around.
Yeah.
With my students or anybody that, you know, wishes to stay and ask more questions. But otherwise, I will turn the recording off. I will be sending out an evaluation form, as well as additional resources, a professional development certificate, and information about upcoming programs in the next couple of days. So stay tuned for those. And if you're a student, I will also make sure that you receive co-curricular credit for participating. So I'm going to turn off